No, I actually retired in 2016 because there wasn't nothing really happening. I had a couple of hip replacement surgeries, and so I retired in 2016. So I'm like now starting to come back because everybody keeps saying, well, why don't you come back, man?
At 67, Tony Cox has confirmed the tragic rumors. The hip replacement surgeries were just the beginning of a story Hollywood never wanted you to hear.
My aunt, she had found this acting school, and the guy, he looked at me and he started asking me questions like, but what make you think you can act? And I said, because I know I can act. And he started looking at me and said, look at you. The only thing you ever do is be in costumes. And that really, it hurt me real bad.
The discrimination started from his very first audition in Hollywood. A casting director looked at the young Tony Cox and delivered words that would haunt him for decades.
The writers just don't write good roles for us. They put you in a costume. That was the only work when I came out to California. That was it.
But the cruelest blow came years later. A car accident that would shatter more than just metal and glass.
It was like a party every day coming to the set because you had all these comedians, and working with Bernie, Bernie Mac was just the best. That scene in which I threw the brick into his window and to see how Bernie Mac, acted and stuff, there'll never be another Bernie Mac.
This is Tony Cox's untold story of survival in Hollywood's most unforgiving industry. Tony Cox's journey began in the most unlikely of places, Uniontown, Alabama, a small black belt town where being different could either break you or make you stronger than steel. Born Joseph Anthony Cox in Manhattan's Women's Hospital on March 31, 1958, his early separation from his mother would set the tone for a life of resilience and determination. When Cox was just 9 months old, his grandmother, Lottie Jones Witherspoon, took him to Uniontown to raise him while his mother remained in New York as a social worker, sending money home when she could. This early abandonment, though born of necessity, planted seeds of independence that would serve Cox throughout his Hollywood career. Growing up in Uniontown as a little person presented challenges that would have crushed lesser spirits. By age 4, Cox barely stood above his grandfather's kneecap. His grandmother would try to encourage him by saying milk would make him grow, and Cox would gulp down as much as he could, desperately hoping it would add inches to his frame. The cruel reality hit him hardest on the first day of 3rd grade in 1967. While his classmates had grown taller over the summer break, Cox remained the same height. The visual reminder of his difference in a small southern town where conformity was expected could have destroyed his confidence entirely.
But Uniontown, Alabama was just the best for me. That was my hometown, small town, everybody knew everybody, and being a little person, it was much better for me being reared up in
Like
Uniontown.
growing up there?
Oh yeah, it was
Why's
much
that?
better. It's just, I think, when you're raised in a big city or something, how people try to pick on you and stuff. I never got that.
Despite the physical differences, Uniontown's small-town community provided Cox with something invaluable: acceptance and protection. Everyone knew everyone, and Cox was simply Little Tony to the community. This early experience of being known as a person rather than a condition would later help him navigate Hollywood's tendency to see little people only as novelties or costume wearers. But Cox's true salvation came through music. His grandmother Lottie recognized his natural rhythm and bought him a drum set when he was just 2 years old. By age 8, Cox had developed an extraordinary ear for music. He could hear a song once and play it perfectly, even though he couldn't read music.
No, I haven't drummed in a long time, but I had my own band back then, Tony and the Real Things.
Tony and the
The
Real Thing?
Real Thing, baby.
No way.
Doing our thing, man.
What did you guys play, rock?
No, we played funk.
Tony and the Real Thing became Cox's first taste of stardom. The funk band played at local clubs throughout the 1960s and 70s, giving Cox his first experience performing for audiences who saw his talent before his size. The confidence he built behind those drums would later translate to the screen, where his commanding presence often made audiences forget his physical stature entirely. Music also provided Cox with his first understanding of collaboration and chemistry with other performers. The tight rhythm section work required in funk music taught him timing and the importance of supporting other players while still maintaining his own distinct voice. Skills that would make him invaluable to comedy ensembles decades later. When Tony Cox made the decision to leave Alabama for Hollywood in the late 1970s, he carried with him the confidence of a young man who had never truly been rejected for his size. Uniontown had sheltered him from the worst of society's prejudices, but Los Angeles would strip away those protections with brutal efficiency. Cox's initial plan wasn't even to become an actor. He had enrolled at Alabama State University to study music, believing his future lay behind a drum kit rather than in front of cameras. But when he discovered that the university required him to read music, a skill he'd never needed during his years of playing by ear, Cox realized he would have to start over from the beginning. The decision to leave college after just 3 weeks was painful but necessary. Cox's aunt and uncle, who had heard him play drums, offered him the opportunity that would change his life forever. They told him he had too much talent to waste in Alabama and offered to help him get to California to make something of himself. The road trip from Alabama to Los Angeles was Cox's first real adventure outside his protected small-town bubble. His grandmother accompanied him along with a friend named George, making the journey a true passage from childhood to adulthood. But nothing could have prepared Cox for what awaited him in Hollywood.
My aunt, she had found this acting school, and the guy, he looked at me and he started asking me questions like, but what make you think you can act? And I said, because I know I can act. And he started looking at me and said, look at you. The only thing you ever do is be in costumes. And that really, it hurt me real bad.
Cox's first encounter with a Hollywood casting director shattered his Alabama-built confidence in seconds. The man didn't see talent, potential, or the charismatic performer who had commanded funk club stages. He saw only Cox's size and immediately relegated him to the lowest tier of entertainment: costume work, where his face and personality would be completely hidden. The psychological impact of this rejection was devastating. Cox left that first acting school audition with tears in his eyes, feeling like his dreams had been crushed before he'd even had a chance to pursue them. This moment would haunt him throughout his career, even after he'd achieved success. But Cox's aunt provided the psychological intervention that saved his Hollywood dreams. She used her understanding of Cox's psychology to challenge him. If I was you, I would go to that school and show him. She reminded Cox that the casting director didn't know where he came from, how he was built, or what was in his heart. The next 2 acting schools Cox auditioned for provided dramatically different responses. At the second school, they couldn't believe he'd never taken acting lessons before and said he could help teach the class immediately. At the third school, Ammare Studios on Vine Street, the response was even more encouraging.
And I remember the guy saying, he said, you got a chance to make a lot of money. He said, you don't come up off the street like you. He said, you just came out of nowhere. He said, you really got a lot of talent. And he said, I give you 3 months. And he said, you'll be on your way. But you do need to go to this school for a little while.
The Ammare Studios instructor saw what the first casting director had missed: raw, undeniable talent that couldn't be taught. Cox's natural charisma, timing, and presence were so strong that industry professionals recognized his potential within minutes of seeing him perform. Cox graduated from acting school 6 months ahead of schedule and finished at the top of his class. His teacher, Ruben Marino, was so impressed that he not only promised to get Cox an agent, but wanted to become his manager personally. Within 3 months, Marino had made good on his promise, launching Cox's professional career. Despite his early promise and natural talent, Tony Cox quickly discovered that Hollywood's treatment of little people in the 1980s was both limiting and dehumanizing. The industry seemed determined to reduce him to a novelty act, or completely hide him in costumes, denying audiences the chance to see his genuine acting abilities. Cox's early career was marked by roles that stripped away his humanity and individuality. His credit in The Greatest American Hero read simply Circus Dwarf, not even a character name, just a description of his medical condition combined with a stereotypical occupation. These early experiences taught Cox that the entertainment industry saw his dwarfism as his primary qualification for work. Even when Cox landed a role in the Star Wars universe, appearing as an Ewok in Return of the Jedi in 1983, his face and personality were completely hidden behind elaborate costumes and masks. While the work provided steady income and the chance to work with legendary filmmakers like George Lucas, Cox felt diminished by the experience.
Because you had to function in those suits, man, because, to put on those suits, man, you had to put, first you had pajamas, that go on first. Then after that, you had the bulk, which made you big, so you put that on, and people had to help you put that on.
The physical demands of costume work were brutal and dehumanizing. Cox had to endure layers of padding, fur, and headpieces that made him lose 10 pounds per day from sweating. When directors called cut and the Ewok heads came off, steam would rise from the overheated performers like, "You could have put a pot of rice up there and cooked it." More painful than the physical discomfort was the psychological impact of being reduced to anonymous costume work. Cox knew he possessed the talent and charisma to carry scenes and connect with audiences, but the industry seemed determined to keep his personality hidden behind masks and makeup.
Being a little person in Hollywood, you really get typecast all the time.
You do get that stigma. He's a dwarf, he's a midget. Why? We are all human beings.
Because we're little, there are many stereotype roles.
The typecasting was relentless and financially devastating for his kind. During the Christmas season, Cox would be offered elf roles. For fantasy projects, he'd be cast as magical creatures or mythical beings. The industry's imagination seemed incapable of seeing little people as regular human characters with normal jobs, relationships, and problems. The financial instability was crushing. Cox went through periods of 8 months without work, surviving on rice and beans while waiting for the next costume role to become available. The feast-or-famine nature of his career created constant anxiety about his ability to support himself in one of America's most expensive cities. But Cox's breakthrough began when directors started recognizing his ability to bring depth and humanity to even the most stereotypical roles. His work in films like Beetlejuice, 1988, and Willow, 1988, showed that he could elevate material through sheer force of personality and talent. The real turning point came with his role as jazz legend Pee Wee Marquette in Clint Eastwood's Bird, 1988. For the first time, Cox was playing a real person, not a fantasy creature or comedy relief, but a complex individual with his own story. The role proved that Cox could handle serious dramatic material when given the opportunity. As Tony Cox entered the 2010s, decades of physical comedy, stunt work, and the natural challenges of dwarfism began taking a devastating toll on his body. The hip problems that would eventually force his retirement from acting had been building for years, creating chronic pain that Cox heroically hid from audiences and colleagues. Dwarfism, particularly the type Cox was born with, places enormous stress on the skeletal system throughout life. The disproportionate growth patterns that characterize his condition create unusual pressure points in joints, leading to premature wear and tear that can become debilitating by middle age. For Cox, the hip problems were compounded by decades of physical performance. His comedy style often involved physical pratfalls, exaggerated movements, and stunts that placed additional stress on joints already compromised by his medical condition. The famous fall scene in Bad Santa, where Cox holds his groin while tumbling, was just one example of the physical demands his roles required.
No, I actually retired in 2016 because there wasn't nothing really happening. I had a couple of hip replacement surgeries, and so I retired in 2016. So I'm like now starting to come back because everybody keeps saying, well, why don't you come back, man?
The hip replacement surgeries Cox underwent were not routine procedures. For someone with dwarfism, any orthopedic surgery carries additional risks and complications. The anatomy is different, requiring specialized surgical techniques and equipment. Recovery times are often longer, and the results can be less predictable than for average height patients. Cox's first hip replacement surgery was followed by a second procedure when complications arose. The recovery process was grueling, requiring months of physical therapy and adjustment to new limitations. For someone whose career depended on physical comedy and energetic performances, the surgeries represented a fundamental change in capabilities. The timing of Cox's health crisis coincided with Hollywood's evolution away from the types of roles that had sustained his career. The industry was moving toward more sophisticated representations of little people, exemplified by Peter Dinklage's dramatic success in Game of Thrones. But this evolution also meant fewer opportunities for Cox's particular brand of physical comedy. The combination of health problems and industry changes created a perfect storm that pushed Cox toward retirement. At 58, he was facing the reality that his body could no longer handle the physical demands of his established screen persona, while Hollywood was offering fewer opportunities for someone of his generation and style. The decision to retire in 2016 wasn't entirely voluntary. Cox found himself in the position of many aging performers, watching his body betray the skills that had made him successful while the industry moved on without him. The hip surgeries became a convenient excuse for a retirement that had become inevitable. But retirement proved more challenging than Cox anticipated. Away from the spotlight and the adrenaline of performance, he struggled with identity and purpose. The same drive that had brought him from Alabama to Hollywood made it impossible for him to simply fade away quietly. On August 8, 2019, Tony Cox's life took another tragic turn when he was involved in a devastating car accident that would add another layer of trauma to his already challenging later years. The incident occurred at the intersection of Beverly Boulevard and Detroit Street in Los Angeles at approximately 11:55 a.m., a moment that would haunt Cox and forever change a young cyclist's life. Cox was making a right turn when his vehicle struck a 13-year-old boy who was riding a silver Schwinn bicycle in the crosswalk. The impact was severe enough to throw the child from his bike and trap the mangled bicycle under Cox's front passenger tire. Photos from the scene showed the twisted metal embedded beneath his car, a stark reminder of how quickly routine moments can turn catastrophic. The young victim, who was wearing a helmet at the time of impact, suffered a foot injury and was rushed to a local hospital. While he remained conscious and alert throughout the ordeal, the psychological trauma of being struck by a vehicle would likely stay with him for years. For Cox, the accident represented every driver's worst nightmare. The knowledge that a moment's inattention or mechanical failure had caused serious harm to an innocent child.
As a little person, that's one thing you have to have is a personality, man.
Oh, yeah.
Because this world is cruel, and if you take
that's what I'm
everything
saying.
personally, and
Yep.
it's just going to be really hard for you. You got to have tough skin.
Oh, you have to.
Yeah.
You have to.
The investigation that followed was thorough and ultimately determined that Cox was not at fault for the accident. Police found no evidence of reckless driving, impairment, or criminal negligence. Cox was not arrested or issued any citations related to the incident. However, the legal determination of innocence did little to ease the emotional burden of knowing his vehicle had seriously injured a child. For someone who had spent decades bringing joy and laughter to audiences, the car accident represented a cruel irony. Cox had built his career on his ability to make people smile, but now he was associated with trauma and pain in the life of a young person and their family. The accident occurred during Cox's retirement, when he was already struggling with health issues and identity questions. The added weight of this traumatic event pushed him deeper into reclusivity and self-doubt. Public recognition, which had once been a source of pride and connection with fans, now carried the risk of being associated with the accident rather than his entertainment achievements. The psychological impact of the accident compounded Cox's existing struggles with retirement and health problems. Already dealing with chronic pain from hip surgeries and the loss of professional identity, Cox now carried the additional burden of knowing he had accidentally caused serious harm to an innocent person. Media coverage of the accident was relatively restrained, but the entertainment industry's gossip networks ensured that news of Cox's involvement spread quickly. For someone who had always been known for bringing happiness to others, being associated with a tragic accident represented a fundamental shift in public perception. The accident also highlighted the particular vulnerabilities faced by aging performers with physical disabilities. Cox's dwarfism, combined with his advancing age and recent surgeries, may have contributed to changes in his driving capabilities or reaction times. While not legally responsible for the accident, Cox likely questioned whether his physical limitations had played a role in the tragic collision. At 67, Tony Cox has finally reached a point where he can acknowledge the full scope of the tragedies that have shaped his later years. The hip replacement surgeries, the car accident, and decades of discrimination have taken their toll, but they haven't broken the spirit that first drove him from Alabama to Hollywood over 4 decades ago. In recent interviews, Cox has been remarkably candid about the challenges that forced him into retirement. The hip surgeries were more than medical procedures. They represented the end of the physical comedy style that had defined his career. The car accident wasn't just a legal matter. It was a source of ongoing emotional pain that complicated his relationship with public recognition.
So I'm like now starting to come back because everybody keeps saying, well, why don't you come back, man? I mean, if you retire, come back. So I'm thinking about coming back.
The encouragement Cox receives from fans has become a source of healing rather than additional pressure. People who recognize him on the street aren't asking about the car accident or his health problems. They're expressing gratitude for the joy he brought to their lives through his performances. This positive feedback has helped Cox rediscover his sense of purpose. Cox's potential comeback isn't driven by financial necessity or ego, but by a renewed understanding of his value as an entertainer. The same tough skin that helped him survive decades of Hollywood discrimination is now helping him process the tragedies of his later years and find meaning in them.
I kind of want to do, it's a movie that was written by me and a couple of friends. And I want to do that movie. He passed away.
Okay.
And his name was Gino Denti.
One of Cox's current projects is deeply personal. A mafia comedy he co-wrote with friends, one of whom has since passed away. The film would feature Cox as the lead in a story that treats his character as a complex individual rather than a novelty. The project represents everything Cox has fought for throughout his career. The chance to be seen as a complete person rather than just a little person. Cox has also expressed interest in doing a reality show that would follow him as he travels and meets fans around the world. The concept appeals to him because it would showcase the genuine connections he makes with people rather than reducing him to scripted characters or costume work.
It was like a party every day coming to the set because you had all these comedians, and working with Bernie, Bernie Mac was just the best. That scene in which I threw the brick into his window and to see how Bernie Mac, acted and stuff, there'll never be another Bernie Mac.
When Cox reflects on his career highlights, he focuses on the relationships and collaborative joy rather than individual achievements. His memories of working with Bernie Mac on Friday emphasize the daily fun of being surrounded by talented comedians who respected each other's abilities. These experiences remind Cox that his value in the entertainment industry was never just about his size, It was about his ability to enhance ensemble performances and bring authentic humanity to every role. The tragic rumors that have followed Cox throughout his career are finally being confirmed, but not in the way gossip magazines might have hoped. Cox's tragedies aren't scandals or failures. They're the natural challenges that come with aging, living with a disability, and navigating an industry that has never fully understood how to utilize little people's talents. By acknowledging these struggles openly, Cox is reclaiming control of his narrative. The hip surgeries, the car accident, and the discrimination are all part of his story, but they don't define him. At 67, he's still the same performer who brought joy to audiences in Bad Santa, Friday, and dozens of other projects. Cox's potential comeback represents more than just a return to entertainment. It's a demonstration that tragedy doesn't have to mean defeat, and that the same resilience that brought him from Alabama to Hollywood can carry him through whatever challenges remain ahead. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.